Billie Jean King, the woman who built women's tennis from nothing, just detonated on Nike in a confrontation nobody anticipated. Over a $300 million campaign the corporation erased under pressure from the very institution she founded. Nike pulled Alex Eala's campaign. The WTA allegedly pushed for it, and Billie Jean King, she refused to stay quiet. This was not a tweet. This was not a carefully rehearsed statement designed to protect relationships. This was 60 years of fury, compressed into words so precise and devastating that executives across two continents flinched simultaneously. A 20-year-old Filipina girl, the highest-ranked Filipina in WTA Tour history, a Nike global ambassador, the player who defeated both Madison and Świątek back-to-back as a wildcard, had her face, her name, her identity stripped from a campaign worth $300 million. And the legend who created the very structure that allowed women's tennis to exist looked at what had happened, and she did not forgive it. Before this story makes complete sense, you need to understand two things. You need to understand who Billie Jean King actually is, not the name on a trophy or the title in a textbook, but the flesh and blood human who bent the architecture of professional sport through sheer, unrelenting force of will. And you need to understand what Alex Eala represents in the year 2026 and why her commercial erasure carries a weight that extends far beyond the boundaries of a marketing budget. Billie Jean King founded the Women's Tennis Association. She did not attend a meeting where someone else created it. She built it. In 1973, when women athletes were routinely dismissed, patronized, and paid fractions of what their male counterparts received, King organized and launched an institution designed to permanently alter the commercial and competitive landscape of professional tennis for women. She co-founded the Women's Sports Foundation. She risked her career, her income, and her reputation repeatedly in service of a principle she articulated with characteristic directness. Pressure is a privilege, and every inch of equality requires a fight. Just days ago, Billie Jean King accepted the 2026 Gleitzman Citizen Activist Award at Harvard Kennedy School, reflecting on 60 decades of advocacy for gender and pay equity in sports, a gathering that underscored her enduring, still active presence in these conversations. This was not a retirement speech. This was a woman still operating at full voltage, still watching, still measuring whether the institutions she built were honoring the principles embedded in their foundations. In 2025, she became the first female athlete to receive a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in the sports entertainment category. 60 decades of advocacy distilled into a bronze star on a sidewalk that millions of people walk past every year. The recognition was enormous, but King had never sought recognition for its own sake. She sought results. Now turn to Alex Eala. Born May 23, 2005 in Quezon City, Philippines, she carries a career-high WTA singles ranking of world number 29, achieved on March 16, 2026, making her the highest-ranked Filipina in WTA Tour history. She claimed the first Filipino Grand Slam junior singles title at the 2022 U.S. Open. She entered Miami in 2025 as a wildcard, ranked 148th in the world, and departed that tournament ranked 75th after defeating two top 10 players consecutively as a wildcard. By February 2026, she stood at the Nike World Headquarters in Oregon as a global ambassador, not a regional face, not a market-specific endorser, but a genuinely global representative of the most powerful sports brand on the planet. Everything about her story was momentum. Everything about her trajectory was acceleration. And then, in a decision that rearranged the power structures of women's tennis in ways nobody was prepared for, the campaign disappeared. The $300 million global campaign had been meticulously constructed. This was not a standard endorsement arrangement, the kind of deal involving a face on a billboard and a racket held at the correct angle. This was a full creative architecture, a multi-platform, multi-season storytelling initiative centered entirely on Alex Eala's journey from a junior champion in Manila to a global competitor dismantling Grand Slam winners on the tour's biggest stages. Nike's creative teams had invested heavily. The campaign drew from every authentic dimension of Eala's biography: her Filipino heritage, the Sampaguita blossom motif that Nike had already introduced through her Wimbledon hair tie, the visual language of her national identity woven through high-fashion athletic aesthetics. Nike had already released an Eala-inspired limited edition shirt designed by Filipino artist Georgina Camus, featuring the national flower of the Philippines overlaid on the All England Lawn Tennis Club's grass courts. The $300 million campaign was the next exponentially larger expression of that creative commitment. It was culturally significant in ways that transcended commercial calculation. For the first time in women's tennis marketing history, the entire weight of a global Nike campaign was anchored by a player from Southeast Asia. 600 million people across the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and surrounding markets had never seen a player who looked like them, spoke like them, carried their cultural identity at this level of international visibility. The campaign launch date had been confirmed, the creative materials had been finalized, the global rollout had been mapped across digital, broadcast, and retail channels on multiple continents. And then it stopped. No public announcement, no press release explaining a commercial decision, no statement from Nike's communications team with the careful corporate language of a voluntary strategic pivot. The campaign simply ceased to exist in the spaces where it had been expected to appear. The silence itself was deafening, and into that silence came whispers, precise, sourced, credible whispers, that the cessation had not originated inside Nike. It had originated from pressure applied externally, specifically from within the WTA's institutional hierarchy. The argument, according to those whispers, was built around competitive equity, the claim that an individual player receiving this magnitude of singular commercial attention distorted the collective marketing environment of the tour, that it elevated one athlete's commercial identity to a degree that structurally disadvantaged others. The argument, examined objectively, had a surface logic, but beneath that surface lived a different reality entirely, and Billie Jean King, who had spent 60 years learning to read that precise gap between stated justification and operative motivation, recognized it immediately. She was not willing to let it pass without confrontation. Billie Jean King had just told Sky Sports, after the WTA's record-breaking Mercedes partnership announcement in December 2025, that the organization remained leaders in women's sport and described what was happening for women as extraordinary. That declaration now sat in direct tension with the campaign suppression story. If the WTA was truly leading women's sport, why had its institutional energy been directed toward limiting one women athlete's commercial reach rather than expanding it? The contradiction was public, documented, and impossible to ignore, and every day without a credible institutional response compounded it. Here is the truth that the institutional argument against Eala's campaign fundamentally misunderstood. Commercial value, when it is genuine, cannot be suppressed by institutional preference. It can be delayed, it can be temporarily disrupted, but it cannot be extinguished. Sky Sports presenter Gigi Salmon had stated at a tennis event in London, in terms of her appeal, the crowds that follow her, she might already be the biggest star. That assessment, made by a credible mainstream sports broadcaster, not a Filipino fan community, reflected a market reality that was bigger than any single tour's institutional preferences. Eala's real commercial story was already inspiring before any fictional inflation. Legitimate partnerships with Nike, Babolat, Globe Telecom, BPI, Locally Juice, and Milo built incrementally on genuine achievements across multiple years. The market had not required persuasion. It had required proximity to her story, and then it had responded organically. The Philippines alone represented a market of over 115 million people, with extraordinary digital engagement rates and a deeply personal investment in Ayla's career. Southeast Asia collectively represented commercial territory that the WTA had historically undermonetized and underserved. Nike's $300 million campaign had been, among other things, the most significant attempt by any major sports brand to activate that market through the story of a single athlete with deep, authentic roots within it. Terminating that campaign did not make the market disappear. It made Nike temporarily absent from it. And market vacuums, as every commercial strategist understands, fill rapidly with competitors. As Billie Jean King's confrontation gathered force and visibility, Nike's internal calculations shifted. The institutional pressure that had precipitated the suspension began to look, in retrospect, like the less costly problem compared to the reputational exposure of being the corporation that suppressed a $300 million campaign celebrating a Filipino woman at the explicit demand of the organization that claimed to champion female athletes. The reinstatement conversation began, quietly, then with gathering momentum, then with the kind of inevitability that characterizes commercial decisions being corrected after public exposure of their original reasoning. Nike had survived 6 decades of controversy by losing arguments to institutional politics when the market itself had already delivered its verdict. Step back from the specific players, the specific dollar figure, and the specific institutions involved, and a larger story resolves itself into focus. Billie Jean King did not create the Women's Tennis Association so that its institutional weight could, 50 years later, be directed against the commercial advancement of a Filipina girl who had earned every ranking point, every headline, and every brand conversation through documented, verified excellence on a tennis court. She created it so that women athletes, all women athletes from every nation, every background, every heritage, would have a structural environment in which their commercial value could be recognized and realized without artificial constraint. When that institution deviated from that founding purpose, King's response was not complicated. She corrected it, loudly, publicly, without apology. And in doing so, she demonstrated something that the next generation of advocates, athletes, and institutional leaders needed to understand. Founding purpose is not decorative, it is operational. When an organization drifts from its core conviction, the people who built it have both the standing and the obligation to call that drift by its precise name.